Chapter 5. Stevenson. Fear and illustration. It has long been understood that fear is a powerful motivator. Fear-mongering is a common tactic in media for ratings and politics for support. Howard Leventhal attempted to test this. He gave participants a pamphlet on the dangers of tetanus infections. Some were filled with grotesque and graphic images, while others only had text. Additionally, some subjects were given a specific plan for arranging a tetanus inoculation. The graphic images, intended to stimulate a fear response, alone were not enough to influence subjects' decision to get a tetanus shot. Only when the graphic images were accompanied with detailed information about where to get a shot and a schedule of when they would be given did people get the inoculation. Panic is not caused by fear alone, but when the fear is accompanied with an illustration of how to behave. Perhaps that's why the fictional broadcasts that produce Skyfall events are so effective. They produce fear, then illustrate others panicking. William Stevenson, The Nature of Skyfall Events. Porto, Portugal, October 31st, 1988. The city of Porto had vomited on itself. Personal belongings trailed the path of hysteria across the city. Even shoes were left behind during the exodus. Cooper and Nichols' plane landed inland because the Porto airport's operations had halted. Cooper and Nichols' plane landed inland because the Porto airport's operations had halted. A team of agents met them with a car, and they headed towards the city. Getting in was easy, but once the highway ended, the city's traffic gridlocked with abandoned cars, all pointed towards the east. They disembarked and walked through the empty streets. Nichols paused at a dented can of beans resting against a curb. Brown and black mush oozed out the side. An untied sneaker lodged in the metal crevice. Food was everywhere. Boxes of macaroni spilled into the streets. Bags of bread were mashed into the pavement. Bits of glass lay scattered below broken storefront windows. Two dogs in the street snarled at each other. A package of hamburger gripped in their teeth as they fought a tug-of-war. Beneath a car, a cat watched the scene. Its tail ticked back and forth as though it waited to collect the leftovers. Nichols stepped in a soft tomato. Crap. He flicked his foot, shaking loose red, juicy chunks. What happened here? You know what happened, Silas grumbled. We spent the whole night discussing it. It's different when you see it, I guess. Nichols hung and shook his head. I didn't expect it. Did you imagine anything else? Silas sneered, his voice rising. The streets are empty. The city is barren. Did you assume that's how the city simply functioned? Silas gestured to their surroundings. This is what the world looks like after the sky falls. Forgotten. Abandoned. His voice lost its usual stuffy irritation and took on a smoother, almost lusting quality. Available. He tensed and faced Nichols. This is the weapon we promised them. Holy shit. The young agent stopped and scanned the city. No radiation, Cooper continued. No chemical diseases, no infrastructure damage. A fully functioning city, ripe for the taking. He pointed to a set of keys dangling in a car. They even left us transportation. That's why we got the jet. They would do anything for this. We all would, Cooper said. As the day wore on, people trickled back into the city. Most carried packs with them. Some sat in their cars. Others knelt outside vandalized stores and wept. Eventually, the two reached the train station. The hiss and whistle of locomotives echoed through the empty interior of the building. Have you met him before? Nichols pulled a worn paperback book from his shoulder bag, a copy of Ian Fleming's 007, For Your Eyes Only. If you ask him for a signature, I'll shoot you in the knee, Cooper said. Oh, come on. How often does a person meet the real James Bond? Nichols opened the book to a page stuffed with a yellow newspaper clipping of an interview with Ian Fleming. A highlighted section read, James Bond is a highly romanticized version of a spy. William Stevenson is the real thing. I can promise they're nothing alike, Silas said. Stevenson is a quiet, meticulous man with little care for luxury or extravagance. He's extraordinarily ordinary. Nichols scoffed. I doubt that. It's not an insult. Cooper adjusted his silk tie with manicured fingers. It's who he is. It's what he does. Stevenson's entire life, appearance, and the way he lives is designed not to draw attention. He's shorter than the average man, so he wears lifts. He doesn't order a fancy drink with accompanying instructions. He orders whatever he hears other people ordering. He's a spy. He wants to be forgotten the moment he's gone. A train whistle cut the air, and churning metal screeched through the station. Each train car rolled past, empty, vacant, like the people had simply vanished. Nichols' voice faltered. There's no one on the train. From the last car, a single passenger emerged. His thin, gray hair rustled in the afterbreeze. He appeared average in height and build. His clothes were not new, but also not faded. Crumbs dusted his pants. He brushed them away. Extraordinarily ordinary, Nichols thought as he watched the man. Stevenson's eyes twitched as though taking in everything in the train station in a methodical manner. Tipped tables, upside-down benches, and overstuffed trash cans. A few employees scampered through the debris. Stevenson, Cooper called out, this one is yours, as per our arrangement. He pointed to Nichols, then maneuvered his way around the refuse and dregs. As he left, he picked at tiny bits of lint on his clothes. Nichols waved at the new arrival and picked up his bag. I'm Case Officer J. Nichols. I know. I chose you. Stevenson nodded, then stooped to examine several streaks of blood on the floor. He glanced at his colleague. So, you've come to study Skyfall. That being the case, I need to ask you a question. He stroked his chin and tilted his head as he examined the marks. I'd prefer you not think about it, but simply answer with the first thing that comes to mind. He fished out a plastic tool from his briefcase, along with a small bag. I'm not interested in the multitude of perspectives you can think of. I want to know your gut instinct. He looked Nichols in the eyes for a long moment until the young agent glanced away. What would you do with the power to change the world? Nichols knitted his eyebrows together and tilted his head. He adjusted the pack on his shoulder, along with a few other articles of clothing to buy time. But I wanted to ask. His hand fidgeted with his book. What do you mean? It's a simple question. Stevenson scraped up the blood with a plastic tool and deposited it in a plastic bag. We are in the business of changing the world. I'd like to know how you want it changed. Nichols' lips parted. He wanted to say, I don't know, but Stevenson had asked for a gut instinct reaction. What would happen if he said the wrong thing? Why hadn't Cooper prepared him for this? You're thinking too much. Instinct, your first idea, Stevenson instructed. Nichols took a deep breath. I don't know. I haven't considered it much. Stevenson paused a little between each word as he spoke. You don't know. That may be your instinct, but it's not honest. Stevenson rose. I've never met a man who hasn't thought about how to change the world. You're either ashamed of your answer, or guess I'll react poorly to it. He met Nichols' gaze again. Keep digging. What's wrong with the world? How does it need to change? I want specifics. I suppose I'd want... And don't give me that crap about making the world a better place, either. I want to know how you plan to do it. Hitler thought he was making the world a better place by exterminating the Jews. The old man jabbed his finger at his partner. If you can't answer that question, then you've got no business studying Skyfall. But I've already been studying them. I read your work. I know. Stevenson gestured for them to keep walking. But I am more interested in what you will do. He continued towards the central lobby. They overheard some employees shouting at each other. Stevenson stopped and listened for a moment. The voices were not clear enough to identify what they were saying. Stevenson adjusted his hearing aid. Nichols smiled for a moment. He imagined Stevenson didn't really need the hearing aid. He wore it because he could get away with it and only used it to hear things he shouldn't. If I was old enough to get away with that trick, I'd do the same. Have you seen the city yet? Stevenson asked. Only what we passed on the way here. It looks like someone tried to crumple the whole place up and throw it away. Stevenson stopped and clenched his jaw. Your answer? Nichols took a deep breath. I suppose I believe in democratic power. Give it to the people. Ha! The old man let out a fake laugh, as though mocking the answer. The people already have it. They're its driving force. As the Latin goes, vox populi, vox Dei. Stevenson stepped into the street. I'll give you a pass, but by tomorrow, tell me what that means, the specifics of giving it to the people. Nichols recognized the phrase. The voice of the people is the voice of God. The foundational idea behind all democracy, that whatever the people want collectively they can take or create, just like a god. Outside the station, clear blue skies arched over the roadway cluttered with vacant cars. Several were left partially on the sidewalk in a failed attempt to bypass the gridlock. Stevenson leaned through the open window of a car and ran his hand over the steering wheel. His eyes intently forward like he was driving through a snowstorm. I always wonder what they were thinking at the moment they began to believe. He pulled back out. I find it best for the investigation not to assume I wouldn't believe. I start imagining after that. What comes next? What do you do when Martians, sea monsters, or the imminent end of the world are suddenly real? Stevenson finished and worked his way down the road, surveying the damage. A gleam caught his eye, and he knelt down. 5 bullet shells clustered near a car tire. He gestured to the cars and walls. Notice any bullet holes? Nichols briefly scanned the area, then reached down to pick up a casing. The old man swatted at his colleague's hand just before he touched it. Don't. Stevenson inserted his pen into the metal tube and passed it to Nichols. Do you want to know who fired this gun? What the man was thinking? He waited for his colleague's nod. Then don't touch them with your fingers. The shell rocked back and forth, rattling faintly on the tip of his pen. Stevenson placed it in an envelope, then stood and traced his fingers along the car. A slight dent marked the hood where paint had been stripped off. He extracted a handkerchief and ran it along the surface, held it to his nose and sniffed, then extended it to his partner. Nichols inhaled. Gunpowder. He pulled out his weapon and placed it over the worn paint, then lined up his sight. Nothing filled the view at the end of his gun, just a long road leading to the ocean. The shooter, Stevenson opened his briefcase, concluded something was out there, something real. He removed several paper envelopes and dropped the rest of the shells in, one by one, with the tip of his pen. It was dark. Nichols studied the road and street lamps. I don't know. The man who fired this gun thought these monsters were real enough to fire at them, real enough to believe those 5 bullets could save him. Nichols imagined the shooter staring into the darkness, into the nothing, and still pulling the trigger. The shooter refused to trust what he saw. He chose to believe what he was told. What could convince someone to believe that lie? Stevenson opened his notebook. He hummed a tune and wrote a single phrase before packing his things up again. Round world logic. What? Nichols' head jerked and returned his gun to its holster. That's what we call it. Stevenson pointed to the dividing line of the horizon. We see a flat world and believe that it's round, because that's what we've been told. He copied the license plate number of the car. So what makes me different than the man who fired this gun? He was told monsters were coming to destroy his city. He believed. Nichols' eyes darted back and forth on the ocean, looking, hoping for the slightest curve. There wasn't one, at least that he could make out. Stevenson stepped to his colleague's side. It's easy to think people are foolish and uneducated to fall for such ridiculous ideas in such a short time, until you understand how your own beliefs work. Do you know the math that proves the world is round? He patted Nichols on the shoulder. It's a dogmatic problem. To understand much of science, you must use scientific tools. The same as any religion claims, to know their truths, you must have faith, prayer, and sacrifice. Then you will understand. So, too, does science claim if you just understand the math, geometry, have a microscope strong enough, you too will believe. Stevenson gestured to the ocean and sky. Nichols took in the man's words. A question kicked around in his head. He knew the answer would just be Stevenson's opinion, that it was an irrelevant tangent to their conversation, but his curiosity nudged him again. Then why do more people believe in science than religion? Because the fruit of science is technology. Stevenson slapped the hood of the car. But human belief functions the same, regardless of what they believe in. They turned a corner, walking under the hot sun. On the ground lay a woman's body. Dark shoe prints marked clothes. Tears exposed her skin, blackened from the dirt. Her hands were crushed into mulch. Nichols knelt and felt for a pulse. Stevenson's voice dropped low and somber. It sometimes happens when the panic hits a city. The wind shifted her hair as it splayed across the sidewalk. No one will ever be held responsible for this. It's part of the power. I know Silas warned you about me, but look at her. No one is looking for a killer. It looks like an accident, and it probably was. If he can control Skyfall events, then he can kill anyone. Stevenson swallowed hard, and no one will ask any questions. Nichols pulled his hand away from her neck. Silas promised some incredible things. I know. Stevenson turned. Come, we have much work to do. He stopped at the first payphone and called in the body. In the distance, long streaks of black smoke billowed into the sky. You want to convince me that we shouldn't give Skyfall to the CIA, don't you? Stevenson glanced over his shoulder. No.